Hey, everybody, and welcome to our 2023 Civics for Advocates How Springfield Works. This is a guide for environmentalists on the process of Springfield, and we are really excited to go through with you the process of how everything works and connect it to where it comes from in the law, and then give you some tips on making your voice heard in Springfield through all of the mechanisms that are available. This isn't, we're not going to go through power analysis and some of that today, but we are going to go through the full process in detail. I know that this is going to be a long one, but we've worked really hard on today's slideshow and updating it if you've ever been before, and we're really excited about where we're going. So I'm just going to take a quick second to introduce our legislative director, our Environmental Law and Policy Center's legislative director, David McEllis, who, all of us have Senate Democrat backgrounds, actually. So that's something unique here between the three of your presenters today. David will introduce himself when he starts as well. And then we have Ariel Hampton, who's our legal and government affairs manager. And she is going to do a part of the presentation as well. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Illinois Environmental Council. We're an organization that since 1975 has worked to safeguard Illinois, its people, its plants and animals, and its natural systems. We're building power for people and the environment. We are a coalition organization that has over 100 different environmental organizations that are part of IEC. So Environmental Law and Policy Center, for example, is on our board. But I see with a lot of you here today, lots of members: Illinois Audubon Society, Metropolitan Planning Council, Chicago Zoological Society, Sierra Club, lots of friends from all over the state who are on this call today. So thank you for being here, and thanks for supporting our work. This is really key. And this is just part of the work that we do in terms of building power for our people and the environment at our Illinois General Assembly. We really start with education. That includes education of lawmakers on environmental issues, education of all of you about how you participate in the process. Then we work on advocacy and asking lawmakers to do the right thing on the environment, and accountability and putting out scorecards to make sure that people know how their lawmakers voted. So we're really excited about that work. I think, let me just toss this to David to talk a little bit about Environmental Law and Policy Center.
Thank you, Jen. The Environmental Law and Policy Center, or ELPC, is a Midwest-based public interest environmental organization. We have a team of attorneys, policy advocates, communication specialists working in states throughout the Midwest and Great Plains, as well as an office in Washington, D.C. As Jen said, my name is David McEllis. I'm the Illinois Legislative Director for ELPC. Prior to my work at ELPC, I worked on legal staff for the Senate, the Illinois Senate Democrats, staffing the Environment and Energy and Labor committees. And with that,
Great. I'm going to do a little bit of the agenda. And also, I know a number of you are attending for continuing legal education credit for attorneys. I'm going to put that into the chat in just a second when David starts speaking, and I'll put a reminder in as well. If you are hoping to get Celia from this, you'll get 2 hours. We have made that application. So I will put that link in the chat in a minute. Today, we've sort of revamped this. If you've ever been to our to this before, it's going to be very substantive. We're going to go through the Illinois General Assembly, sort of how it's been created. We're going to go through who's in it. We're going to go through the legislative process. We're going to talk a little about drafting a bill, researching a bill, and then we're going to end with making your voice heard, from anywhere from individual testimony to lobbying. So I think you're in for a lot of fun. It's going to be fun. And I am going to pitch this over to David to get us started. And if you have questions, please feel free to put your question in the chat at any time. We may answer it as it arises if we see it, or I may stop presenters to ask the question. But we may also just take some of the questions at the end. We do have 15 to 20 minutes at the end, and we're happy to answer anything that you want to ask about the Springfield legislative process, or even save specific bill questions for the end, though. So let's do process questions during it. But we are really excited to head into this presentation now. So I'm going to pitch this over to David to get started.
Thanks, Jen. From the start here, we have the Illinois Constitution as this is, as there are CLEs available here. I figured we should talk about maybe at least one or two cases later, but also the Illinois Constitution and the basis of the legislative process. Section 8 of the Constitution lays out that bills can start in either the House or the Senate, and either chamber can amend or reject amendments from the other chamber. But no bill shall become a law without the concurrence of the other chamber. And so unlike the federal legislative process in Illinois, the same language of the same law has to pass both the House and the Senate in the same form. And so that is a constitutional requirement. There's also a constitutional requirement that a bill be read by title on 3 different days in each house. What that means in practice is a bill reading could be as simple as Senate Bill 1, an act concerning fish. And that's a reading of the bill. So the bill is read by title on one day. The next day it is read a second time. Senate Bill 1, an act concerning fish. The third day, the bill can be voted on, but it has to be read by title on 3 different days in each house. So there is a time limitation in the Constitution that limits the speed with which a single bill can pass. There are some ways around that we will get to later on through the use of shell bills, but the underlying bill that language is attached to has to be read 3 times. Also in the Constitution, a provision around the effective date of laws. We will dig a little bit more into this later on, but the General Assembly has to pass bills before June 1st of a calendar year. So normally session goes until May 31st. This year it ends a little bit earlier than that, which is nice, gives Jen and Ariel and I a little bit of our May back. Normally we don't end up able to do anything in the beautiful month of May because we're stuck in Springfield. But in the Constitution, a bill that passes prior to June 1st will go into effect. If it does not have a listed effective date on it, will go into effect January 1st of the next year. But it can also have an immediate effective date that is written into the bill. So it could become effective immediately, but bills passed after May 31st don't become effective until June 1st of the next calendar year. So if a bill somehow passes in July, if there's a special session, unless there's a 3/5 majority, that bill doesn't go into effect until June 1st of the next year. Next slide, Jen. The legislature, again, is made up of the House and the Senate. The General Assembly includes both a House and a Senate. 118 House members. Going into this 103rd General Assembly, there are 78 Democrats in the House and 40 Republicans in the House. So that is a supermajority of Democrats. In the Senate, there are 40 Democrats and 19 Republicans, also a supermajority that is greater than 3/5 majority. There are 2 House members in each Senate district. The Senate district is split in half. And so those House districts are, what's the word, contiguous or fully contained within a Senate district. To find out who your legislator is, you can go to ilga.gov, and on the front page of that, I think Ariel will show that later on, there is a legislator lookup that sends you to the Illinois State Board of Elections webpage to find your legislators. Next slide. On that page, you can also learn about your legislators if you know who they are. Here we have friend of the environment, Senator Laura Fine from Glenview. And here it has her office contact information, both in Springfield and in district. Committee assignments are listed there. They are listed there right below her years served, as well as a short biography, and then links to the associated representatives in that Senate district. On a House members page, you would find the associated senator listed. This is a brief summary of the process that we will walk through in more detail later on. We have a bill introduced in the first chamber. Bill goes to committee. a floor vote on that bill if it passes out of committee. The bill then goes to the second chamber. So if it starts in the Senate, it will then go to the House, go to committee in the House, go for a floor vote, and then once it has passed both chambers in the same form, goes to the governor's office. Or you see this little diversion here for a concurrence. That is, if the second chamber has amended the bill, that bill has to go back to the first chamber to be voted on in the same form before going to the governor's office. The governor's office, the governor will then sign the bill or veto the bill, and that becomes law. And I believe that there was a song and dance that was promised here, so I'm not going to sing the how a bill becomes a law in Illinois. It's far too complicated. As you see here, that maybe 10-step process on the prior slide is listed here in excruciating detail from the legislative reference unit. And in effect, it says what we just said, but it adds in every single step along the process and things that we won't get into here because they very rarely come up, things like conference committees and other processes that generally don't come up. I think there's amendatory vetoes on there, but that is the full and gory detail of how a bill becomes a law in Illinois. There are deadlines, and these are legislatively set. They are set by either chamber, and there are some ways around these deadlines, but these are really set as guidelines for the way that the majority of bills will pass through the process. And those include LRB deadlines, and we'll get into what LRB is. That's the Legislative Reference Bureau. They draft the bills. One of those is tomorrow. If you want to draft a Senate bill, it has to be submitted to LRB by tomorrow. But then there are deadlines for bill introduction, bills out of committee, bills out of the first chamber, and then further, there are deadlines for bills in the second chamber. And then this also includes the adjournment date of May 19th in both chambers. There is a calendar in both chambers. Everything is on that calendar, including days that the Senate and House are in session, as well as some of those deadlines. You see here, February 10th is a bill introduction deadline, I believe, in the Senate, and everything is on that calendar. And those calendars, they generally stick to them, but some of those Thursdays and Fridays later in session end up getting canceled. There's also a link on the ilga.gov website for everything that's happening this week. And there's also a dashboard, myilga.gov, that has something similar, and that will tell you all of the hearings that are scheduled for the week, all of the committee hearings, both in the House and Senate, as well as their locations, whether or not they are canceled. So a very helpful tool to figure out, at least for the initial first set of bill postings, when things are set to go in Springfield.
This is also a great way to figure out where lawmakers are in the building. If you happen to be attending lobby day or something else, you can get an idea of what committees they might be attending at what time.
And to that point, that's back to the legislator lookup page. When you look up the legislator's biography, it'll also tell you their committee assignments. And so you can use that to figure out if they're going to be in whatever committee. You can find them and wait outside that committee. Talked about June 1st bill passage deadline, as well as May 31st. Normally the legislature is out on May 31st. That is the usual adjournment day. And that is because after May 31st, the vote count moves from a majority to a supermajority if you want to have an immediate effective date or an effective date that is within the calendar year. So this is an example. So you can set, when you're drafting your bill, you can set an effective date either to be immediate You can specify an effective date. You can say, I want this to be effective 2 years from now, or you can set it to take effect along with another bill. It just, it would only become effective if these 3 bills all pass. There are many ways that you can do that. You can also leave that section totally silent. And if a bill has no express effective date, the effective date is either January 1st of the following year, if it's passed before June 1st. And if it passes after June 1st, it takes effect June 1st of the following year. And there's also, because there are different vote total requirements when it changes from a majority to a supermajority, we see an example here from 2012 where a bill, the clock ran out on May 31st. And so it switched after May 31st to a 3/5 vote requirement. And so we see a vote of 33 to 21, which on May 31st is enough to make a bill become a law. But as soon as the clock hits midnight, we all turn into pumpkins, and you have a 3/5 majority. You require 36 votes to pass a bill out of the Senate. And so unfortunately, this bill failed because it was beyond midnight on May 31st. So it became June 1st. That bill ended up passing, I believe, a little bit later in the year, but at midnight on that night, that was a disappointing evening, I think, for Jen.
That's very sad. There's a lot of people very upset that night. So, but in November, we were very excited.
And this is another real world example and a legal example of the May 31st deadline and the effective date question. This was Springfield Right to Life versus Felicia Norwood. Felicia Norwood was the Director of Health and Human Services. House Bill 40 removed trigger language and included some public funding for abortion services, and it removed trigger language that would have made abortion illegal in Illinois if Roe versus Wade was overturned. And so this was 2017. So foreseeing possible changes on the Supreme Court, legislators introduced this bill to remove that trigger language, as well as including some public funding for abortion services. This bill ends up passing the House on April 25th. There's no effective date listed in the bill. May 10th, it passes the Senate, and there's a motion to reconsider that is filed. And this is a procedural motion that allows the chamber to hold on to a bill for a potential reconsideration of that vote. It's often done by someone who is a supporter of the bill, and in this case was done to allow the Senate to hold the bill to make sure that Governor Rauner would actually sign it before the Senate sent him the bill. So because there's no effective date, if this bill is signed, it should go into effect January 1st of the next year. But because of that motion to reconsider, the bill isn't actually sent from the Senate until September 25th, when that motion to reconsider is withdrawn. The Senate waited to get assurances from Governor Rauner that he would actually sign the bill. So they finally, on September 25th, get those assurances, withdraw the motion to reconsider, send the bill to Governor Rauner, who signs the bill on September 28th. The bill was challenged for multiple reasons, but one of the reasons was the effective date. The challenge was that because the bill did not leave the Senate before May 31st, that the effective date, if it did not have an express effective date, that the effective date would be June 1st of the next year rather than January 1st. The Illinois Supreme Court said that the final legislative act was May 10th when the bill passed the Senate, not September 25th when that motion to reconsider was withdrawn. And so they said that the effective date was January 1st of the next year, January 1st of 2018. So that is a real world example of this May 31st deadline and some procedural motions and how the court views those with respect to effective dates of laws. So the process of drafting a bill, it can really start from anywhere. Anyone could come up with an idea. I've seen legislators go to the Legislative Reference Bureau with ideas written on napkins. Sometimes lobbyists come to legislators with ideas. Sometimes people just read something in the newspaper and say there ought to be a law about that. Jen and I always suggest that folks do as much research as possible on a law before proposing it to a legislator, getting ideas from other states, checking the Illinois compiled statutes to make sure that a similar law doesn't already exist, that we're not reinventing the wheel. We also recommend that you draft as much as you can, because when you take your bill language to the Legislative Reference Bureau, they're going to try to both make sense of it and also make it in a format that will fit on ilga.gov and fit into Illinois statutes and Illinois law in the format that's normally used. And so those drafters are all attorneys at LRB, and they and their client is whoever brings them the bill and whoever brings them language to draft. I think you can copy and paste from other states, but sometimes other state laws don't look like Illinois laws. So it's important to kind of know the elements of a law, and we'll walk through that in a minute. And I think we can go to the next slide. So this drafting process takes place at the Legislative Reference Bureau, which is located in the Capitol. And you should be a registered lobbyist to take a bill to LRB. I'm not sure if they accept outside suggestions, but generally isn't recommended. And I know Jen and Ariel and IEC can help walk through that process. If there is a bill idea and if there's an idea that IEC should support, they can help with getting folks in touch with LRB to get something drafted. To talk to LRB, you have to have a bill sponsor. And so it's good to have presented an idea to a legislator prior to taking that language to LRB, because you have to tell them this is a request for, in the case of the earlier senator that we used, for Senator Laura Fine. You have to have some buy-in from that senator that they actually are interested in pursuing that bill. You'll need to have both bill language, an idea. LRB can do some of the work, but they appreciate as much guidance as possible in what you're trying to do. And you'll also need to have an effective date. That could be, as we talked about earlier, an immediate effective date, a specific date in the future, or it can be silent, but knowing that if it's silent, there is the chance that if it doesn't pass before May 31st, you could have a bill that doesn't go into effect until the next year. You should also know the statute that you would be amending or the section of code that you would be amending to try to give as much information to LRB as possible, and to get in touch with the right drafter there, as they are separated by sections of code. As I said earlier, there's a deadline tomorrow for Senate requests. We always try to get those requests in earlier because legislation can take up to a month to get drafted. And it's always nice to give those drafters as much time as possible in case they get you a draft back and it doesn't look right, or there's spelling errors, or there's things that don't necessarily make sense, to get those changed before bill introduction deadlines. All right, next slide. So these are the parts of the bill that you're going to want to have. In the past, Jen has asked me to come up with bill ideas, and my bill ideas are often outlandish and ridiculous and involve people wearing backpacks on CTA properties. But this year, I'm going to talk about a real bill that we were working on this year, which is a bill to require the transition to EV school buses. And so the subject of the bill could be transportation or vehicles. So it could be an act concerning transportation, an act concerning vehicles. You don't necessarily have to spell this out to the drafter. They may just be able to guess it by the nature of your bill. But sometimes you really want to have a specific subject of the bill so that that bill can't be used for something else. I like to reference an act concerning fish. And partially that's because let's say Jen and I are working on an issue that's involving energy, but there's no bills available that are energy titles. Well, we can't use an act concerning fish to amend into an energy bill. That subject of the bill it can be pretty specific, or it could be broad. It could be an act concerning regulation or an act concerning state government. And those could be pretty broad titles that really you could attach any language to those bills. The short title of a bill, an example of that is the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. In this case, we could use the Electric School Bus Act, could be the short title. It's not necessary to have a short title, but sometimes, particularly when you're organizing around a bill, or if you really want to get legislators to know what your bill does just by 3 or 4 words, things like the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act or the Future Energy Jobs Act are good short titles to have. Purpose, policy, legislative intent. This is oftentimes narrative and not usually legally operative language, but it could be used for legislative intent if there's a court challenge of a bill that says this law was not intended to do blank, but then in the legislative intent it says, well, clearly this bill is intended to clean up school buses in the state of Illinois. It can describe the problem that you're trying to address. It can describe health issues. It can describe economic impacts. And those are things that were included in the legislative findings of the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act. And you'll have definitions. And these definitions are often for the purpose of this act. The word school bus means blank. So are we talking about every school bus? Are we talking about only school buses that fit more than 10 students? Are we talking about school buses for public schools, private schools, et cetera? We also define electric vehicles, or we could define it as zero emissions vehicles. How do you want to define the words that you're using? In our cases, we're using electric vehicles and school buses as they exist. School bus already exists as a defined term in the vehicle code. Electric vehicle exists as a defined term. You can refer to other sections of the law for those definitions. The main provisions of your bill are going to be the real operative language of what you want your bill to do. In this case, by 2035, we want every school bus in the state to be an electric school bus. That's the main provision of the bill. It could be as simple as just that, or it could be 5-10 paragraphs of different requirements. Penalties, not applicable in this case, but in things like environmental enforcement bills, you could have civil penalties or criminal penalties for violation of those acts. Severability or inseverability clauses can be included if you have a very involved and long bill that has multiple parts. For example, in the Future Energy Jobs Act in 2016, in that case, there was a severability clause that basically said, if one portion of this bill is challenged and struck, the remainder of the bill can still operate. So there was a court challenge regarding the nuclear subsidies portion of that bill. And if that portion had been struck, the remainder of the bill and the other good things in the Future Energy Jobs Act would have remained intact so long as they could still operate without something that was struck as unconstitutional. In that case, that challenge failed, but for a little while, there was an idea of, would this severability clause have to come into play? On the other side, you can have an inseverability clause and say, if one portion of this law is struck, all of it is struck. You'll want to put in, along with an effective date, you'll also want to have a repeal date. So a repeal date could be also seen as a sunset date. And that is in terms of a limited program. So if you have a program that's designed to run for 5 years, you can have a repeal date set 5 years from then. And as soon as that repeal date passes, the law is no longer operable, it's struck from the books. Or in 5 years, you could come back and say, yeah, this program was supposed to end in 2023, but we want to extend it for another 5 years. And you can just change that number to 2028 and extend it for another 5 years. Next slide, please. When you're looking at a piece of legislation, new acts, things that are brand new language, for example, in my EV School Bus Act, as it is all new language, it's not amending an existing portion of law, it is adding a new section. That language is not underlined. If you're changing a law, as I was just saying, with the 2023 to 2028 date, in that bill, you would underline the 8 or the 2028, and you would cross out the 2023. So you could replace that. And so the new text is underlined, old text is struck through. And anything that's brand new language, brand new sections are not underlined. For example, here we have from the Clean Energy Jobs Act, you have the findings. So this shows us both the findings as well as what new text looks like. And so those findings show, discuss the clean energy economy and the growing economy and show kind of the purpose of that act. And it also shows that new text is not underlined. Strike through and underline. So in this case, oftentimes when things are being cleaned up, there will, I'm not even sure what this one is, but you have a section 1-175 of this act. So instead it was changed to this section. So this is shows a change of law. So you both have struck and underlined portions of that. Some example environmental statutes and issues that we deal with often are the Utilities Act, that's section 220, the Public Health Act, environmental safety, agriculture, and conservation. And so if you were going to the Legislative Reference Bureau, these are some of the statutes that you would say, this is an issue around agriculture. So you would talk to the agriculture drafter or the utilities drafter or conservation drafter, et cetera. All right, and now I think pass it to Ariel to use ilga.gov.
Thanks, David. So how to use the General Assembly website. There are a lot of links that are available. It can be a little overwhelming at times, but here are some of the important ones that you should know, like the link to the Illinois Constitution, which is where we get the rules and process for lawmaking, as David outlined earlier, to the Illinois compiled statutes, where the current laws on the books reside and that are arranged by subject matter. And then we also have the administrative rules, which are the details that follow after laws. So then we also have different forms of legislation. So the language of the legislation will largely depend on what form you want that bill to take and why. So if you want the language to become a law, you must choose to draft the language as a bill. And then if you want it to make a statement without legal effect, it would be a resolution. So there are so many things that can go on here. As you can see, there's House bills, Senate and House resolutions, and Senate and House joint resolutions. You also have proposed administrative rules, which can usually be found in the Illinois Register. The Illinois Register doesn't necessarily cover everything, but you will probably find what you're looking for there, and it typically updates on a weekly basis, usually a Friday. Next slide, please. So this is the homepage of the Illinois General Assembly website. So while it may not be the most attractive website you'll find, it is essential to gathering information for your advocacy. And there are some other helpful links that I want to flag for you all since we're looking at the homepage. So there's the legislator lookup that David mentioned earlier. There's the General Assembly dashboard, which will give you a quick look at what Senate and House, if the Senate and the House are in session, which they're not today, and what committees are scheduled if you click on the link on the day that you're looking for. You'll also have the ability to create an account using the My Legislation link and create a list of bills. And you can also watch what happens live using the audio and video links below. There are also a list of for the members of both chambers and their committee assignments once those are available. Next slide, please. So to read a bill, you have to find it, of course. So there are various ways you can find a bill if you don't know the bill number. You can search using by keyword function, which is the search that if you were looking on the left side of the homepage for ILGA, you would find. But I do want to make sure folks know you will only be able to use that particular keyword function if you are in the current General Assembly. Remember that we're in the 103rd General Assembly and each GA lasts 2 years. So the current one will cover us for bills starting now in 2023 till 2024. You could also use the sponsor's name if you have it to find the bills. You can go to the member page and then look through the list, find the sponsor, click on them. You'll be able to get what bills they're the sponsor of, and if they're the lead sponsor of that bill, to give you a good idea where that bill could be. But if you do have the bill number and it's for the current General Assembly, it's really easy. For the sake of the example, I used SB 100, which you'll see shortly, and that'll make sure how you go about reading that particular bill. So you should start with the sponsor. Next slide. Yes. So if you'll be able to find the sponsor's name. One moment, let me make it bigger so I can see it. So this particular one is by Senator Laura Fine. The bill number, as I said earlier, is SB 100. If it was a House bill, it would be HB 100. Yes, to the Sigma in the chat. I know you all love this one. And then the synopsis as introduced is essentially the summary. While you can read the summary and it should give you a good idea, you should not rely on the summary necessarily being accurate all the time, and it may not give you a full idea of everything that is in the bill, just so you know. So if we were to look at the full text of the bill, which is linked above, and I've put an arrow there to show it to you all. And there's also the action that have taken place on the bill that are below, but I'll get on to that later on. Next slide, please. So this is what the bill looks like. I know it can seem a little bit like what is going on here, but it's fairly easy once you give it a look. So like David outlined, an act concerning safety, you have a good idea of the subject matter of the bill. Here, it's in the Illinois Protection Act, which David also mentioned earlier. So you have an idea of where it is, where it will be in the law, assuming that it gets passed, and hopefully it does get passed, because this is one of the bills that we really care about at IEC. So if you look at line 6, you'll see 415 ILCS, and then you'll see that it says new. That's an indication that it is a new section to an existing act. So this particular bill is on polystyrene food containers, and this particular bill would be effective immediately after coming law, assuming that we meet the majority vote requirements before May 31st. And this bill, if you look at certain details of it, say line 12 on the next side, on the right side, it says that it begins in January 1st. So the effective date is when the law becomes effective, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the provisions within the bill become effective immediately. So you'll want to look for dates. You want to look for who's in charge of what is the bill telling you to do something? Is it telling someone not to do something? And that's how I will often read the bill to start. Now, next slide, please. Now, on to how to research a bill. Same what I said earlier about the summary, and you'll want to do an actual initial read through of the bill, which sounds easier than it probably is because some of these bills are very lengthy. Think CJA. And I don't know if anyone really read CJA all the way through from start to finish, but certainly not in one sitting. I hope not. But you'll also want to ask a bunch of questions like, who brought this bill? Sometimes it will come from sponsors, like mentioned earlier. Sometimes it'll come from an idea that a constituent brought to the sponsor. And sometimes it comes from various groups. And knowing who brought the bill will often give you a good indication of the intentions behind the bill. And you'll also want to look at who's supportive or opposed to the bill. There's also neutral, but we're not necessarily concerned about those folks as much. You will eventually see on the witness list who is supportive or opposed, but folks tend to tell you up front if their organization is supportive or opposed to the bill, which is great to know, because if you want that bill to pass, if you like it and you see a bunch of folks are opposed to it, and they're not opposed to the concept in a general sense, but there might be something that you can tweak that you don't mind, that's something to pay attention to. Also, are there particular phrases in the bill? Say polystyrene. I doubt that most folks are familiar with that term, and oftentimes folks use styrofoam instead, even though they're different. You'll see like, oh, let me just Google this for a moment. What's polystyrene? Why do people take issue with it, etc. You can look up all sorts of academic articles and things of that nature, so you can find out what the bill is about, gives yourself good background in order to make sure that you have a good understanding of the bill, and that if you like or dislike a bill, that you can communicate your knowledge to folks. And then next slide, please. So we have co-sponsors in addition to sponsors. So here is SB 2408 from the 102nd General Assembly, also known as CJA. As you can see, we have a ton of co-sponsors here, and it's super important because not only are they show a good level of support, it's another level of commitment to their yes vote. And so you will want to gather co-sponsors for bills that you're supportive of to make sure that you let people know, hey, this bill can gather this level of support. You should co-sponsor, you should be on it, you should be supportive and vote yes to the other legislators in order to get your bill passed. And now I'll pass it along to Jen.
Yeah, well, and let me just add with this one, and we can talk about how we choose sponsors, but you'll notice in some of this, you may want to choose sponsors that are very different, and the ones with the dashes between it are chief co-sponsors, and the ones with commas between it are sponsors. And so you can see, like in the House sponsors, Marcus Evans is from the Black Caucus, Jay Hoffman is Downstate Caucus, and Williams, Robin Gable are Green Caucus, Kim Buckner's Black Caucus. So getting some diversity in there, you may want to get some bipartisanship in your top 5, and I'll show you why that matters in a second. So I'll show you, this is just what we've talked about in written format, and I just want to go over it again. I know this 3 reading thing is super confusing because our Constitution says you need to read a bill title 3 days in a row, and yet I just passed a bill over lame duck in less than 24 hours. So how is that possible? I'll show you some of that later, but here is a little rundown of what this looks like on ilga.gov. This is a bill, House Bill 4818. Nicole at Sierra Club worked on this one a lot. It's about, and also we worked with UCME in Metro East to work on this. It's a bill that bans PFAS incineration. So you notice it was introduced, it went to Rules Committee, it got assigned to Economic Opportunity and Equity Committee, got out of that committee. There's another amendment that got referred to the committee. It did go to second reading. The amendment had to go back, be adopted. It was adopted and it went to third reading where there was a vote. Then it went over to the Senate and it was in assignments, had some co-sponsors added, went to Environment Committee. The amendment was adopted. Apparently we had a second amendment and that one was also adopted. And so then it went to second reading and some more co-sponsors, third reading, you can see the votes unanimous. But as we've talked about, the same text needs to pass both chambers. And so with this bill, it was amended in the Senate. So that means that it was different from when it started in the House. It was House Bill 4818. So it had to go back to the House. So went back to the House and you can't make any changes on concurrence. So they just concurred with the amendments that were filed in the Senate, added some more co-sponsors and it passed right here, a 111-1, added some co-sponsors, sent it to the governor approved it, it became Public Act 102-1048. So yay, the bill is passed. This is a really old picture where you can see one of the reasons the top 5 co-sponsors can matter is that, if like you're really lazy and you're choosing that, I don't want to read the bill analysis, I don't want to read the bill. You can look up at the board and you can see, oh, these are some of my allies that are, sponsoring the bill. So maybe this is something that I can vote for. And the board, this is a bill where it's unanimous, but, there's green, yellow, and red on the board, and it's often called on the board. So that's where, you'll see the votes in the end, and that's why co-sponsors matter. I want to talk a little bit about amendments. We've done this throughout, but, we've drafted your bill, right? And very rarely has a bill that I have just drafted gotten to the finish line with the way that I started it. Most of the time the bill will get amended and it might get amended a lot of times. And so you gotta watch those amendments, you gotta file them. So typically an amendment is filed by a sponsor, but you can file an amendment on a bill if you're not that sponsor. It's considered really hostile. And also it can be blocked pretty easily by the Rules Committee. And so it's not often done, but it can be done. Bills also can only be amended in committee or on the floor. And the bill has to be on second reading to be amended, once after it's gotten out of committee. And so there's only certain times you can amend it. So one place I want to describe here, often you'll be watching a committee and they'll do the whole thing. And they'll be like, I'm making a commitment to hold this bill on second. So that means that they're promising to amend it and come back to that committee for it to be reviewed again, because maybe the amendment isn't quite where it needs to go. Maybe they think they need to continue to work on an agreement, but typically, there's a lot of leeway given to committees to move stuff to hold on second, but holding on second reading means just that you are saying that you're going to go back to committee before you move this thing forward, or something else will happen before you move it forward. And that's hold it on second reading. And so, with the process of amendments, you file a bill. And if I file the bill today, first reading, it'll go to Rules Committee. I can't amend it right away. It has to be assigned to committee to be amended. So if a bill is just on first reading, you can't amend it. So, I mean, it still is in first reading, but if it's just on first reading and it's not in committee, you can't amend it. So it has to be in committee. And then if you want to amend it another time, it also has to be on second reading and not on third reading to amend it. So often you'll be watching on the floor, they'll move it back from third to second, and then they'll amend it there. And there's committee amendments versus floor amendments. And you might think a committee amendment is like when it's committee and a floor amendment is when it's on the floor. Not necessarily the case, because sometimes floor amendments have to go back to committee as well. Almost 99% of amendments have to go through committee. There's maybe a 1% that don't, and that can be, for example, maybe there's already been a hearing on it and it was subject matter hearing, so they decided to skip committee because it's something that they're rushing. There also can be, sometimes they'll allow technical changes. So, these lawyers at Legislative Reference Bureau, sometimes they make mistakes, and sometimes they spell a word wrong, or there is a grammatical issue that nobody realized before. Sometimes those can be heard directly on the floor. But most of the time bills have to go back to committee. So every time you amend it, back to committee, back to committee. And so, there's very rare cases that that's not allowed, but understanding that there are only certain times you can amend a bill is important as well. So I just wanted to talk about that and what amendments are when you're doing this. So I'm doing like a little bit of advanced vocabulary here. This is like, legislative process 201. So if you don't understand these, that's okay. But I wanted to try to make some of these terms a little simpler so you can understand if you ever run into or encounter these issues. So postpone consideration, that is when a bill comes for a vote, it can be voted on 2 times on the House or Senate floor. And if the first time it doesn't have the number of votes that it needs, so if it was supposed to get 60 and you come up with 53, you can put it on what's called postponed consideration. And when there's postponed consideration, then you can hear it again and go for one more vote, but you can only do 2 votes total. And that first vote doesn't get recorded. Sometimes from our perspective, we'll score it because we have a record of it. We know because we've seen the board and we've been in the chamber. And so there is a light record, but it's not an official record, but that's postponed consideration. There also is this kind of like a little bit evil move, the motion to reconsider a vote. We talked about that actually with the Springfield Right to Life versus Norwood case that David talked about earlier. Motion to reconsider a vote is where a person, and they have to have voted yes on the bill, they can go file something that's a motion to reconsider that like honestly can't be discharged. They are now in charge of whether that vote moves forward or not. So we had a bill that we supported this last year in the Natural Resource Advisory Board, where somebody who opposed the bill voted yes, filed a motion to reconsider the vote, and it was now allowed to continue to move. And so I don't know, I hope they fix that process a little bit, because there's often times when I have a contentious bill now that I will proactively, and it's the first person to file a motion to reconsider. I will proactively do that so that nobody else does it and then withdraw it. So that's something that we often do because it is a pretty toxic motion that can happen and has been happening pretty frequently. There's also a verification vote. And so, if there's going to be a contentious vote, one of the things, if you ever watch the Illinois General Assembly, is they are running around. And it looks pretty disrespectful to sometimes just to like, you'll have both speakers, you'll have the bill sponsor, and then somebody asking them questions. And then you will have 116 other lawmakers not at their seats, wandering around. Maybe they're in the bathroom, maybe they're somewhere else. They're just not on the floor. It's not like members of Congress where you vote one at a time. The votes are literally have all voted who wish, have all voted who wish, have all voted who wish. Take the record. Like that is literally what happens on the House floor. And sometimes it is that fast. And so a verification, you might ask for a verification, and that means that people have to be in their seats or in the chamber, and they'll do a check to see who is there. And sometimes, somebody will have voted yes on something, or no, well, mostly yes on something that isn't in the chamber, and somebody flipped their switch for them. And so that is something that can happen. I put a bunch of different terms in here that are kind of random, but just wanted to give you guys this in case anybody ever talks about it. The rail, sometimes lobbying at the rail is something that you hear, and that is literally a railing that is around the chamber for the House is on the 3rd floor. The chamber on the Senate is usually on the 3rd floor, but this year for 3 years they will be in the Howlett building, which is I'm not enjoying that. It's a lot less access to lawmakers and a lot more walking, so not as fun for me anyway. But the rail is just a railing that lobbyists hang out at, and often will say at the rail. There is a thing called fiscal notes too, which is another procedure that can be used to stop a bill. And there's all sorts of different notes that can be filed on a bill. You can do a budget note, a fiscal note. I'm forgetting there's like 5 or 6, they're in statutes. We've actually thought about adding an environmental note, but the agency needs to file a response, or you need to have more than 60 votes being able to discharge that note. to move forward. So it's another way of blocking a bill, but sometimes you'll see those notes. And sometimes you might see them proactively because, maybe you want to know how much the bill costs and say like, this is zero, like despite what you're saying about this bill. So, so that's a fun time. I included the word omnibus here. Omnibus just might mean there's a whole a package. So when we did CEJA, it was considered an omnibus energy bill. Sometimes there's an omnibus ethics bill or an omnibus election bill, where things that are small issues aren't allowed to move on their own. They have to be combined together. I included Century Club here. That's more of our cultural thing. And that is when a bill in the House receives more than 100 or more no votes. I was talking with some people beforehand. I'm not sure when that passed, when that last happened, who got the Century Club. A BIMP is budget implementation plan. We don't cover budget stuff in this, but if somebody has questions about the budget, because the budget is even more difficult than all of the things that we described here. And the budget implementation plan is a corollary to the budget, where the budget may have all the line items, and the budget implementation plan is like where the money is coming from to pay for that budget. So it's sort of like the income part of the income expense ledger, but they'll say BIMP a lot, and you'll be like, what is that? That is a weird word. Governor's Office of Management and Budget oversees it. A household sponsor is actually just dealing with one of those today in pre-file. So when you file a bill, you need to get, you can have somebody from the opposite chamber pre-file that they want to sponsor it when it comes over, but you don't get to pick who's going to sponsor it. Somebody else can just step up and take it, and that can be a hostile sponsor. You can discharge that hostile sponsor, but it's not easy, and the rules have changed to make it easier, but you could still have to deal with the hostile sponsor. However, this is a tactic I have also used. When I have a bill I don't like, I have had one of our friends pick up the bill so that it doesn't move forward. I see a few questions in here, so let me see what I can answer. Is a certain number that must be met to have a postponed consideration, or is any number? Any number. You could meet the Century Club. I'm pretty sure that's true. I think you can have any number of votes on that first one. You could have 100 no votes. You can put it on postponed consideration, and then it can get called one more time. So I don't think you need any votes to move it to postponed consideration. With a motion to reconsider a vote, this only happens when a yes vote is changed to no vote. A motion to reconsider a vote is a motion that can only be filed by somebody who voted yes on a bill. So if you voted no, you can't file a motion to reconsider a vote. You need to have been a yes vote. And I don't know, David, you may want to weigh in on
the one thing I would say that I think that the probably the original purpose of the motion to reconsider would be for people who voted yes and then went, wait a minute, that was a mistake. What did I just vote on? And maybe they were the one vote that pushed that vote over the 50% threshold, or, I think that that's the purpose of it, but it's recently been more used for this like strategic reason to kind of hold up a vote as a strategical thing. So it has to be done by a person who has voted on the prevailing side of the bill, but it's not necessarily that they want to vote to change their vote to no. It might just be to hold it up. Sometimes they could want to change their vote to no, but they see that it's going to pass and they want to use this to delay the process and maybe gain some concessions out of it. So it's often a cynically used procedure.
And I think one of the reasons it's hard is because in order to keep advancing, they need to withdraw their motion or reconsider their vote. Or I think you need to have 71 to discharge the motion. I'll have to look at the rules, but it is very difficult to get rid of a motion or reconsider the vote. And so that has been a tactic used recently that's annoying. I have a couple more terms, and this is like advanced level. So if it's something you don't understand, but at least you'll have heard the terms. And when you hear it come again, you'll be like, oh, okay, I've heard about this before. I'm going to talk about 3 more terms that you may have heard, and this is rules and assignments. And I want to specifically address the question, is rules and assignments committee scary? And so this is a lot of times, just armchair commentators will be like, oh, assignments committee killed this bill. That doesn't happen as much anymore as it used to. 10 years ago, assignments and rules were used to kill things, but there's been a different culture shift where bills do get assigned to committee. They just might die in committee. But I want to talk to you about two different places where rules or assignments might happen. And rules is the name in the House. Assignments is the name in the Senate. And I would have told you, like if I didn't like you, I would tell you to go try to find and watch the assignments committee or the rules committee. But lately they have actually been showing it on the live audio video feed, which is new. And previously these were all held in secret. There's no Open Meetings Act that applies to members of the state legislature in that way where, 5 of them gathered in a room can't do business. But so the rules committee is the House, the assignment committee is the Senate. It's just a few members and they make decisions about where a bill should go. And so every single bill that gets filed ever goes to rules committee or assignments committee. It goes there first. Once it's in, that's not bad. That's where it goes. And then it gets assigned to a committee. The piece where there might be more control from the leadership might be that it goes to a committee. And then when you hit a deadline, you'll see here it says Rule 3-9A referred to assignments in the Senate. That means it went past a deadline. So it got re-referred to the assignments committee. And then that's where it does go to die because it didn't get a vote for some reason. This one, actually, the second one is the fracking ban that went to energy. It got assigned to a subcommittee with no members, and then it never was able to be discharged. So it got re-referred to assignments committee. So that one never really had a chance. But typically anything that doesn't meet a deadline goes back to assignments or rules. The Senate is a lot more generous with giving deadline extensions than the House is. The House might just give you a vehicle or shell bill, which we'll talk about in a second. So just to say, there are pieces where it is dead because it is in rules or assignments, but usually it's because it's not met a deadline. And so, usually it hasn't met a deadline, and that's why it has to go back to rules or assignments. Which I think is a fair process thing. You haven't met deadline, your bill is not alive anymore. So that's what rules or assignments are, if you hear about that. I also wanted to cover a shell bill and a vehicle bill. So if you look right now on the General Assembly webpage, there's like 1,500 House bills that are filed, like 1,400 of them are shell bills. And shell bills, we talked about what it takes to draft a bill. And you'll see here, this is a shell bill where the word "and" is underlined and the word "and" is crossed off. This bill does literally nothing. It just changes the word "and" back to the word "and." There's one that does the word "the" as well. Those are other things that happen. So these bills are put in, and often they are moved along the process just as is. They might be moved through usually the executive committee. They might be moved to second reading. They might be like ready to go. And this is so they have met the constitutional definition because this civil law tech bill, the bill will have been read 3 times according to the Constitution. But it's the bill title that needs to be read. And so that'll be read. And if the shell matches what you want to add to it, like an act concerning regulation, an act concerning fish, you can amend it, add something to it, and move it along the process. And this may seem gross, but there are times that I've used this. When we passed the microbead ban in 2013 from personal care products, the idea came pretty late, and I had put IEPA Act shell bill in with the lawmaker because I was intending to introduce another compost bill. And I had it available. That other bill fell through, and I was like, hey, let's add this microbeads ban to the shell bill. And so we did that, and we're able to move it forward on that, keeping that piece of process alive. So, it is available in special circumstances, but it also can be used for evil because, and I say evil because I think that the process should be transparent and fair. And so, when you pass a bill in a very short period of time, oftentimes people don't have a lot of time to review it. So shell bill, this is a vehicle bill. And this is, I just said said, this is a bill that we kind of passed in less than 24 hours from start to finish. And this is a vehicle bill. This is a bill that went all the way through the process. It was a House bill that was on telehealth athletic trainers. And it's an act concerning regulation. This was a bill that was in the Senate, and it was taken over in the Senate to add our local wind and solar siting bill. So that information was added and then went back to the House for concurrence where you can't amend it, and it was done. CJO was done in the same way. That bill we showed, Senate Bill 2408 from 2012 or 2022, that was also a vehicle bill. And vehicle bills are called that because it's it's not a shell, it's an actual bill, and you've just used it as a vehicle. And maybe it wasn't intended that way. There can be reasons like you passed a bill through one chamber and like you don't need it anymore. Some people, in terms of strategy, people ask me a lot, like, what chamber do you start with? A lot of times I'll start a bill in the House and the Senate, and I'll see how far I can get it, because maybe I don't know what it's going to be like. And a couple of times I've passed it out of both chambers and it's identical text. And so one of those somebody can take and use as a vehicle bill because it's gone through the process already. So those are some like high level advanced terms that when you hear somebody in Springfield talking about it, that's what that's like. So I'm going to head in now. I know this has been really dense, and we are recording this, so this is something that can be available to folks. I'm going to go through now, making your voice heard, lobbying and advocacy, and it's going to have a lot of my spin to it. And I'm not going to go through power building, power analysis. I'm just going to give you tips on the basic ways to make your voice heard with legislators. And of course, tip number one for everybody is know who your state lawmakers are. And if you think you know who your state lawmakers are, I'll give you some things to maybe you should look it up again. One, if you think that your state senator is Tammy Duckworth or Dick Durbin, that's not right. Those are your U.S. senators. So you would want to go look up who your state senator was. The same with Congressman, Sean Casten, Eric Sorensen. Those are your U.S. congressmen. You're going to want to look up who your state legislator is. And also, your state legislator may have changed, because this is the first year in a 10-year redistricting map. And so the districts will have changed, and maybe it's somebody else right now than it was previously. So figure out who your lawmaker is, do a little bit of research on them. I'm going to give some more tips in this, but I'm going to talk about witness slips, testifying in committee, grassroots lobbying, and registered lobbyists. A witness slip is something that a lot of people have heard about now, but when I first started in this job, no one knew what that was. But a witness slip indicates organizational support or opposition to a bill. More frequently, it's being used for individual support, and I'm going to give a hot take on that as a tactic. And what happens is you go to committee, and I got some pictures of committee later on, but committee, all the lawmakers are facing one way, and you have a place where there's maybe the bill sponsor or other people doing testimony, unless the bill sponsor's on the committee. So you start the bill, you adopt the amendments, and then the chair will read the witness slips into the record. So now, because there can be, sometimes there's 2 witness slips on a bill and they will read them. When you do a ton of witness slips, like hundreds of them, they'll just waive reading of the witness slips, but they may summarize them, like say which organization filed. And each lawmaker does have like a little tablet where they can review the witness slips as well, if they'd like to, that is at their committee seats. But they read the witness slips before the bill is heard. It used to be on paper, and when it was on paper, no matter what, I had to go run and file it with the staff person to be read in committee. And that was how it was done. Now I can just watch the Illinois legislature from, my cell phone at dinner if I don't want to be at that committee or don't feel like I need to be there. And the last couple of years, it's been very Zoom heavy. This is a point in talking about testimony too, is that I believe the rules are still allowing for Zoom testimony in certain committees, but I don't know how long they're going to do that. I think they've recognized that it's great to have Zoom availability for people who are out of town, for people traveling a long distance, for people who have accessibility issues. But, you know, most witnesses are in person now. So I think they may just allow the Zoom witnesses on special occasions. So, like I said, there used to be paper, but now we're online. I'm going to go through how to file a witness slip because I think many of you have been asked to do this. And I'm going to talk about when this is a tactic I think should happen, when it's not, but I'm not always right on this. So I'm going to give some hot takes at the end on this. So ILGA.gov, you went to the GA dashboard and you will hit this. I highly recommend going to the log on piece. And if you're somebody who's an activist, if you're representing an organization, I highly recommend that you hit log on and you register, because if you like file the slip wrong, like say you hit support when you meant oppose, and that's embarrassing. You know, there are ways to change that, but the easiest way to change it is if you've logged on and you've saved your slip and you can go in and edit it. And so that is something I highly recommend before you do any of this. So first you want to find the committee where the bill is being heard. And usually, like when I will send it out as an advocacy link, I'm going to send you the direct link to the witness slip. So you're not going to have to go through all this process. So that is how that works. So you also, you know, you go here, you choose your committee. I'm in environment. This is the House Environment Committee. These are the bills in that committee in 2017. And then, you know, you've got on the right here, both the little magnifying glass that's supposed to be and a little pen. And so the little magnifying glass is where you see who else has filed a witness slip. That can be fun. And that actually is on the ILGA.gov website now too. You can see who past filed witness slips. And then the little pen is the thing that you click to file a witness slip. So you click on the pen and it takes you here. And I'm not going to give a whole lot of tips here. This is pretty self-explanatory. I am going to give some tips, especially to those of you who are representing organizations. There is this where you put this up here. I think that, you know, I'm not giving you legal advice. I'm not your attorney for any of this. Just reminding people I am an attorney. I'm not your attorney. So I definitely recommend looking up legal advice. But, you know, we're going to go through what makes you cross the threshold where you do have to register as a lobbyist. And if you are somebody who's filing a bunch of witness slips and you filed representation a lot and you're hitting the threshold of $500 and you haven't registered, if that were ever brought to a case, I think that the witness slips could be used as something that was evidence to show that you were lobbying without being registered. But that, I think that's remote. But I just, especially if you're from an organization that is, you know, not just volunteer based, that is a nonprofit, I would make sure that you, when you're filling out the representation section, you leave representation to be the person that is authorized to represent the organization. And if you have volunteers or that sort of thing, maybe under a firm, business, or agency, they're putting, you know, Sierra Club. But I would not, I mean, I don't think anybody's going to get caught on this, but I would say that that's a piece that, you know, if I were going after somebody for violating the lobbyist registration, I would look at that as some evidence. But I would just be careful about representation and put individual if you're an individual. But if you're authorized to represent the group, absolutely put it in representation. I'll talk about the thresholds for lobbying in a minute. So there's this, and then you get down to your positions. You put proponent, opponent, or no position on the merits. For most of you as advocates, there's not going to be a point where you have to put no position on the merits. There are times when I have to, because the bill has been negotiated to a point where there is no position. And then there's this description here as there's original bill. There's times when you can be asked to file on different amendments. So you'd have to figure out which amendment you support or oppose. There's oral, written statement, and record of appearance only. Most of the time you're going to hit record of appearance only. There is a place now to file written statements. Other things with written statements, sometimes if I'm going in person to a committee, I may bring enough copies, give it to staff, and have them distribute it. I don't know that those written statements actually like end up in the hands of lawmakers when they are filed. They may end up, I don't think they even end up in the bill analysis. I just think they end up out there and you have filed a written statement. And if anybody wants it, they can find it. I don't know, David, as a staffer, you guys, where did it go if I file it?
I think officially it is filed with the clerk's office. That said, once those things were filed and I handed them to the clerk's office, I don't know that anyone ever looked at them again.
Yeah.
So I think sending things directly to legislators, if you have those contacts, is probably more helpful, getting it to them prior to committee and having those conversations. But submitting written statements, it might just get sent straight to the garbage.
Cool. So that is a piece on written statements. But like I said, often if I really want to make sure a written statement is read, I will bring it, I will give it to staff, and I will see that they pass it out to people in the committee when I'm there live. And that can happen, and they'll be referencing it. And then oral statements, you might click oral, and I'm going to go through, if you had to testify in committee, what it would be like. So I'm going to give a hot take here, which is that I'm going to talk about this tactic as witness slips. So witness slips from individuals, I think it's a tactic that should be used rarely and is far less powerful than direct lawmaker contact. And I know the witness slip piece, like, it is a hot organizing tactic right now. People are really excited about it because you filed the slip, you end up with hundreds of people that have filed on a bill. And like, that's like really exciting. And there are times where I think that's really important. So for me as a lobbyist, I will choose some places where I think this bill like really needs a lot of grassroots support. And sometimes it's really advantageous for me that happens. And I'll tell a story of why that was important one time. But so one time I was testifying in this committee, and it was about bobcat hunting, and it was ag and conservation. I knew going in that I had 0 no votes on that committee, that it was going to fly out unanimously because of the people who were on the committee. But I was there, wanted to testify, clicked oral, told the chair that I wanted to testify, but it was the chair's bill. They didn't want me to testify, but it was the chair's bill, so the vice chair was proceeding, and she kind of looked at it and was like, wow, there are 300 witness slips opposed to this bill and 3 for it. Can somebody from the opposition come testify? And so like that gave me an opportunity to weigh in. And it does allow lawmakers to see that there's a lot of like, that bill is being organized against, it's really hot, and it might be something that's organic, it might be from advocates. But the thing that makes me nervous about witness slips is that I'm afraid that people fill out the witness slip and they don't contact their lawmaker, and they think that they're contacting their lawmaker when they fill out these witness slips. When you fill out a witness slip, all it does is that the lawmakers that are on the committee see your name and organization. They don't see what town you're from. They don't, they don't see you. And so, I worry about witness slips replacing the tactic of actually contacting lawmakers, because that is the valuable piece. And that's where you as an advocate can make a lot of difference. So I think my advice on this, because it can be powerful, it can show lawmakers this is really important, but it also can be, I think, distracting and maybe take people away from tactics that are powerful. So my advice on being a great advocate when it comes to witness slips is pay attention to what advocacy groups are telling you when it's time to file, and file on those witness slips. But then follow that up by making sure that you're contacting your lawmaker about that particular bill. Even if you can set up something that has both of those things. But if I had to pick one, whether it was a witness slip or contacting your lawmaker, I would choose contacting your lawmaker way above a witness slip. But if you can do 2 things, definitely do both, because having that powerful number, I know it can be really rewarding as an activist to see that. It can be really rewarding to see that level of support. But as far as it goes into committee, all the lawmaker sees is like, oh, there's 320 people. I'm going to waive reading of the record. We're not even going to hear this list of people. We're just going to waive it. Whereas, sometimes it can be more powerful if I agree with the Farm Bureau on a bill, which doesn't happen a whole lot, and the Farm Bureau and I both slip in support and nobody else slips, those records will be read in, and that means a lot to those lawmakers there as organizations that represent a lot of people throughout the state. So that's just my hot take on witness slips. So, we can talk about if people have any questions, but I just have a few more things on advocacy I'm going to go through, and then we'll get to questions. So that was witness slips. There can be times where you would be asked to testify in a committee. And I think, testifying in committee can be real fun. And, if you're asked to do so, it can definitely be an honor. The first time I ever testified in a committee, I testified to the Higher Education Committee 20 years ago in 2003 when I was in college about a bill that had to do with energy efficiency in higher education. And I didn't really know what I was being asked to do. I just know a lobbyist took me and I testified about this particular bill. And it was a very confusing experience. But, I want to make that less confusing for all of you. So the first things first, if you're asked to testify or if you want to testify orally on a bill, you're going to choose oral on the witness slip. But just because you clicked that doesn't mean that they need to pick you. This isn't like city council or something else where they just have to allow public comment. They don't. So if you really want to make sure that you're able to testify, there may be a lobbyist that helps you get there. But if you're just an individual, you want to discuss your desire to testify with the chair or the bill sponsor. And so you would find the chair of the committee, you would ask them, like, I'd like to testify in opposition to this. This is why I oppose it. Could I please do this? There are lawmakers that will just cut you off. In fact, we had a former Senate Energy Chair now who often would just not allow us to testify on bills that we oppose, which is considered really rude. But, that was what it was. And then, you can also be able to testify through the bill sponsor. Even if you oppose something that a sponsor is bringing forward, they may just point to you as somebody who opposes it. And then my general advice for testifying, they'll give you a time period to testify. It's always short. I mean, there can be some subject matter where they may let you have 10 minutes, especially if it's a technical issue. But most of the time, you're really looking at 1 to 3 minutes. So if you're ever testifying, and actually, this is my advice for any government committee you may want to testify in front of, they teach you this in law school a little bit too, is you say your points up front, like have your summary arguments in the first 30 seconds, where you give point 1, 2, and 3. This is why I think you should do this. And that way, if you get cut off, you've given your arguments already as to why this is important. And so you give your arguments and then have different lengths prepared. They could totally cut you off for any reason at any time, or they could just let you keep talking. I've had both experiences, sometimes when the chair is looking at you, like they want you to stop talking, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to stop talking. But keep your testimony extremely short. Think about the entire committee when you're doing something. There are very conservative, very liberal members that are part of a committee, and think about, what puts this in their shoes. So that is keeping your testimony short. I'm going to talk a little here. I need to put the study on here. This is from a congressional study of congressional staffers from Congress. But the point I want to make here with grassroots lobbying and getting to know your lawmakers as an individual is that the more personalized and more in-person the contact is, the more effective it is. So form faxes, form emails, they have an impact, and the lawmakers that'll be like, wow, I got 20, 30 notes about the polystyrene ban. I need to pay attention to this issue. That can happen. But if they get an in-person visit from their constituents, if you go visit them in Springfield in their office, those are a lot more personalized. I think it's still up in the air a little bit about social media because, and we've done a tactic of, our action alert has pieces where you can go tweet and tag your lawmaker's social. And sometimes that's not really effective because the lawmaker will reply on social. But there's mixed reviews, I think, from social media because sometimes those lawmakers don't run their own social media. There might be staff doing it. Or sometimes they don't know that you're a constituent. And those are really the most powerful voices, are the constituents that are in their district telling them about something. And so I would say social media, mixed results. It can be really good. It can be really bad. Definitely lawmakers love, you're just doing a visit with them, tag them in a picture. That's something that we do a lot. They really appreciate that sort of stuff. But I'm going to talk a little here about lobbying. And so Ariel, Elliot, and I are the lobbyists for IEC. David McEllis is a registered lobbyist with ELPC. And so what is a lobbyist? I've posted here some of our friends who are contract lobbyists that work for a lot of different organizations. But lobbying, I think some people think about it they're like, I don't know what this is, or it's a dirty word. It's like something gross of people that just like pay off lawmakers to do the thing. I like to think of what we do, and especially because, I think that this process is made to be inaccessible to the public. And I think it's my job as a do-gooder lobbyist, as a mission-driven lobbyist, to make sure that we're bringing people in and opening up the process, and giving folks our knowledge so that they can access it, because I think that transparency, openness, and light makes better policy. And so you can think of lobbyists, a little bit of us, as your guide. And sometimes I have bad news to share and people get mad at me. Especially when I talk about the limitations of the General Assembly and where they can go, where they can't with the members that are in. But we're your guides. We're your guides through this incredibly confusing process that can have different twists and turns. But lobbying is advocacy. And it's just a type where you're maybe professionally doing it. Volunteers can be lobbyists too. But lobbying is advocacy, and it's advocacy with government officials. Another piece you need to know, lobbyists. I spend a lot of time at the rail, like I talked about, talking to other lobbyists about how to work on a bill together. Maybe I work on settling the differences before the lawmaker even knows that there's concern about it. And then relationships matter. To me, it's really important to be able to get in the door. Somebody that I might fight with on one thing might be my best friend on another thing. And so making sure that we're keeping up a good reputation about being honest and reliable is really key in Springfield. There are different types of lobbyists. We've got our do-gooder nonprofit lobbyists. There can be business-driven lobbyists. These are often in-house lobbyists that might be like Walmart's lobbyist or Amazon's lobbyist. And then there can be contract lobbyists. These are hired guns. And like I said, this is former State Rep Elaine Neckritz and John and Jason on her team. They are contract lobbyists, but they take mostly do-gooder clients and are really building up a really cool lobbying firm. They're the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition lobbyists. You might see them there, but they're contract lobbyists. There are different contract lobbyists that take on themes. They might be a budget lobbyist. They might be like all conservative. They might be a liberal, but there are contract lobbyists. I'm going to talk a little bit here about nonprofits and lobbying, because often there are some misconceptions. But again, I'm not your lawyer. Talk to a lawyer if you have questions about this. But I want to remind people that if you are with a 501c3 organization, you can lobby lawmakers. You can't get involved in elections at all. If you're just a 501c3, you can't endorse candidates. I'll talk about some of the things that you can do, even if there are candidates in a race. But you can't endorse candidates. You can lobby. If you're doing less than 5%, that's in substantial part test. You don't need to do anything. You do need to file a 501H election on your 990s, which is your tax forms. And there are limits on how much lobbying you can do. You can only spend 20% of your organizational resources on lobbying, and only 25% of that can be grassroots lobbying. And the IRS defines direct lobbying as any communication with the legislator that expresses a specific view about legislation, and grassroots lobbying as a communication with the general public that expresses a view about a specific issue and includes a call to action. And I'll say, one of the things with this, and I'm going to talk about lobbying and influencing and stuff, the IRS definition of lobbying is incredibly specific. So this is any communication with the legislature that expresses a specific view about legislation. You need to have all those parts. So you need to have a lawmaker that you're talking to, not just, it's grassroots if it's general public, but you need to have a lawmaker you're talking to. You need to say you support or oppose. And there needs to be a specific bill in mind. So often things like referenda don't count as legislation, depending on what it is. So there's lots of flexibility when it comes to the IRS. 501c3s have a lot of ability to do advocacy in lots of different ways. At the state of Illinois, however, there is a much broader view of lobbying. So you have lobbying means any communication with an official, and this is very similar to the IRS definition. But also influencing is included, and influencing is extremely broad. It's any communication, action, reportable expenditure to promote, support, affect, modify, oppose, or delay any executive, legislative, or administrative action. So that's like lots of things that could count as lobbying. And that is important. Yeah, I have here the Federal Lobbying Disclosure Act. We have influencing legislation that is also at the federal level. But, oh, gosh, I think I may have, no, I do have more on, actually, I'm going to go to that slide really quick. So should you register as a lobbyist is a question that is asked. And in particular with the state of Illinois, it's persons or entities that receive no compensation other than reimbursement for expenses up to $500 a year. So if you're, like the thing that I tell people is if you're spending up more than $500 on an employee to do lobbying, you probably need to register them. It is expensive. If you're receiving no reimbursement whatsoever, so lobby day, there's a specific exemption. There's also a specific exemption for offering expert testimony in a committee. But those are the times where you would need to register, and you do need to provide care to this because it is extremely expensive if you don't register. So I'm going to go to this as well. I also just highly recommend that you build relationships with elected officials outside of the lobbying capacity. So there's lots of reasons why you want to build relationships. You want to spread awareness, make sure your elected officials are aware of what your organization's working on. Build relationships because elected officials got there by being more popular than somebody else. And so they have strong networks they may be able to help you plug in with as an activist or as somebody who might work for a nonprofit. It can help you build credibility, depending on who they are. It can help you problem solve. And this is my key thing. With any relationship you're building with a lawmaker, you definitely want to build the relationship before you have a problem that you need them to fix. And so making sure that they know who you are, it's kind of the thing too of like, it does build relationships to ask people to do stuff for you, but like, that's not where you want to start in a general friendship, just with somebody else. You don't want to start it by, can you give me $100? Like that's not a place where a lot of friendships begin, at least in my life. Other people may have different experiences, but you might have a problem someday you want help with. So building relationships before you ever need anything is really key. Access, you can become a trusted source of information for decision makers. And we're getting to the point where we may not have a fiscal crisis as badly as we did 10 years ago. So maybe they can alert you to funding opportunities. There's a lot of non-lobbying work. Oh, go ahead, David. I need a drink.
I know that we were going to get to questions in a little bit, but I thought that might that last slide might be a good time. I did get a question in the chat that was about asking someone to be a sponsor, and it asked, do I need to be a constituent to have that person sponsor? And I said, no. However, it is important that you trust and have a relationship with your sponsor, so that you trust that they're moving in the right direction that you want to move in, and that they know you enough that they trust your idea is a good idea. And also, it's important to think about what problem you're attempting to solve or issue you're trying to influence. Because let's say you're introducing a fracking bill and you get someone from an area where there never will be any fracking to sponsor that bill, it's not likely that legislation is going to move somewhere. Getting somebody who has that in their district might be a better option. And so building those relationships, knowing your legislator, but also knowing other legislators and knowing their districts is a good way to find a good sponsor for a bill.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. Yeah, and there's I don't know, I have a whole science to how I choose sponsors, especially because we have so many bills that we work on for people and we want to make sure we spread them out. So we can't give 100% of all bills to Anna Moeller and Laura Fine and Robin Gable, who are our besties, and Williams. We don't want to do that. Working with new people, especially, Black lawmakers as sponsors has been really important, making sure that they're getting the benefits of passing great environmental bills too. Sometimes I do have to say, we used to do a lot more bipartisan work than we do today. I like to work with Republicans that care about environmental protection, but we have fewer of them than we used to now in Illinois, especially because we have such a super majority. But there can be lawmakers I work with that maybe are a little more moderate, and I'll choose that. But there's all sorts of science to it. But I would say that, you know, as a constituent, you have the best voice to ask somebody to do something. If you're an individual, if you're working with the group, you know, getting a broader view. And if you want to work on environmental bill, connect with IEC and see how we can help you on it. But I just a couple more slides and then we'll get to any questions. Non-lobbying work you can do with your elected officials. You can add elected officials to your newsletter distribution list. You can invite them to attend events. Anybody can be invited to attend an event, even if they're just a candidate. I mean, if you're giving them something free, you might want to be cautious, and you may want to invite all candidates. Or if you're giving somebody a speaking opportunity and there's an election, you may want to create a threshold, talk to your attorney about it. But if they're just an elected official, there is no election, there's no bar. You can invite them to attend events, you can attend their events, town halls, coffees, etc. Facebook Lives, invite them on a tour. This is my favorite part. I have only had one lawmaker fall in the, well, no, actually it's two now that have fallen in the water when we've done an outdoor recreation event with them. One of them was taking a lawmaker canoeing and they fell in. That was Chad Hayes. And then I did take now Senator Seth Lewis on a group paddleboarding trip, and he fell in a lot of times. You know, not saying anything about his balance, but he did fall in Lake Michigan. So inviting them on a tour or site visit with your staff is really important. You know, just even going on a walk outside, love that as a way to lobby. You can give them district specific information on an issue you care about. We often run district specific fact sheets on how much land is conserved in each district, so they have an idea of what's out there. And then, you know, these are communications that are not lobbying. I would say foundations rarely fund actual lobbying activity because they're taxable. So educating lawmakers or the general public is. So, you know, what we might do in a foundation grant is say that we're going to educate lawmakers about recycling. We're going to educate lawmakers about climate change. And we do a lot of that. That is very just education activities that have no lobbying involved. So let's see here. We talked about should you register as lobbyist, and this is just, we're getting to the end here, and we got a bunch of time for questions. So I hope people ask anything. You know, start maybe with some process questions, but also ask them. This is the IEC office. It's at 520 East Capitol. We actually have new plants out front. So this is an old picture. We have a really cool little garden out front, and it's our little recycling bin. We got solar panels on the top, but it is a nice place to come and relax and enjoy our zero waste food setup, printing, Wi-Fi, relaxing snacking needs. I will tell people my biggest tip for the Capitol is figure out some comfy shoes. You want to be professional. You know, if you're there on a lobby day, you know, business casual is fine. But you know, you do want to. This is business. It is a place of business. But those marble floors are just murder. They really hurt your heels. So wear comfy shoes. Prepare in advance, especially figuring out where lawmakers are. It's kind of like, you know, going to the store and figuring out what aisles your list is in. Just figuring out that whole thing in advance, pretty important. Paloma put into the chat a little bit about our plastics lobby day coming up February 22nd, where we'll be working with the Coalition for Plastic Reduction on the foodware ban. And that is Senate Bill 100, which is a great bill number. And we'll be working on that February 22nd. We will have an environment lobby day that'll be on a few issues, probably this last third or fourth week of April. So keep an eye out for that. We'll probably have buses and bring everybody down and have a rally, and it'll be super fun. So yep, Paloma put in the link to register. And just thank you on behalf of Illinois Environmental Council and all of our membership, Ariel and David. We've just been really pleased to have such a great set of attendees today. And the CLE credit document is in there, and we will share these slides. Like I said, we are not gatekeeping. There'll probably be another session that we do together that won't be so process oriented. That'll be more about power analysis and what the General Assembly looks like for the environment. But with that, I am more than happy to take any questions from anybody. Everybody's on mute, so if you want to be taken off of mute, I have to allow you to do so. Just it's such a big group, but yeah, if you have a question, please put it in the chat or raise your hand. We'd love to have a few questions. unless all of this makes complete and total sense. We'll give it a couple minutes. Oh, cool. Seema, go ahead. Oh, I have to take you off mute. There you go.
Thanks, Jen. Great presentation. Sorry if this is a really naive question, but what would be the reason of not putting an effective date on a bill?
Yeah, oh, that's a great question. And not it's very advanced actually. So effective dates are really interesting because we talked about that because you can put a specific effective date or you can have no effective date, right? And if you put a specific effective date, and like say for some reason the General Assembly goes crazy and there's a budget impasse and you go and you're meeting all year round, and you have that specific effective date in there, you may hit a point where like you have to amend the bill to get rid of that effective date. So typically where you'd include no effective date, because you want the the bill would become effective, not immediately, but it would become effective either it's either January 1st, or if you did it after May 31st, it would be July 1st. Or was it June 1st, David? Anyway,
June 1st.
June 1st. So it's June 1st. And so if you put no effective date in there and you expect that your bill may go into like a veto session or a lame duck and it may go beyond where you want to go, you still have a chance of passing it and it becoming effective without having that in there. And so that's one of the reasons. But David, go ahead.
Yeah, and actually a real world example of that, and the different vote thresholds that you need to have an immediate effective date after May 31st. When the Future Energy Jobs Act passed in December of 2016, initially it had an immediate effective date in there. One of the final, and this goes to the, somebody asked about how many times can a bill be amended? I think infinitely in either chamber. So I think in FEJA, the Future Energy Jobs Act, there were like 6 amendments. Well, one of the final ones deleted the immediate effective date. And so that meant because it didn't have an immediate effective date, it was after May 31st. If it had the immediate effective date, it would require a 2/3 majority vote. They didn't have a 2/3, they didn't have the votes to pass it with a 2/3 majority. As soon as they delete that effective date, it doesn't become effective until June 1st of the next year, but you only need 50% +1 to pass the bill. So that's one of the reasons why you might change that from an immediate to a more fluid effective date. You can amend a bill in either chamber as many times as possible. Back to Claudia's question in the chat. But once it is back on concurrence, it can no longer be amended. So if it starts in the House, you can amend it 25 times. Then it goes to the Senate, you can amend it 25 more times. But once it passes that second chamber, it can no longer be amended.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know that I've ever seen, I guess we had on our CJA tech fix bill, there were like 15 amendments, but and like 8 of them were ignored. Actually, I think 14 of the 15 were ignored, and we just went with like 2 or 3. But I've not seen like an outrageous number of amendments before, so that's fun. All right, and then the lobby days are virtual this year. I know that there are some groups that are doing like virtual district office meetings. I know Sierra Club does that with some of its team. I'm just over virtual lobby days. I'm sorry. I know they're super fun, but we had some low, while we had great attendance from attendees, we did have low attendance from lawmakers on our virtual lobby days. And that is not the goal. It is to talk to lawmakers. So I am headed towards mostly virtual days going forward.
Sorry, do you mean mostly in-person days?
No, mostly in person. You're right. Yeah, down with virtual. So yeah. And somebody asked me a question just to me about a particular lawmaker. Yeah, and I just will tell you, like, I mean, even with, one of the organizing principles in life too, and this is something we do in our power analysis, is that you want to spend more time, working on, the people who are leaning than your best friends or your worst enemies, right? You want to spend your most time there. But I just would say, like, if you're in a district where you have like the greatest, wonderfulest, bestest lawmakers ever on the environment, I know that wasn't a proper English, but even if you have like the best lawmakers ever, you should make sure that they hear from you every once in a while, on all these issues, because, there can be times where maybe they have a close relationship with somebody in the industry. Maybe they have a real conflict about whether they should vote for a thing, and they should hear from you, on something, even if they're the bestest. And they're able to go to their other friends and just be like, I got tons of contacts about this, so constituents are excited. But with lawmakers that tend to not vote for the environment, which Stephen had asked me a question, and those are some not great lawmakers. That just making sure that they're educated. I think part of it, like, you may need to make a decision as a constituent. Is this somebody you never want to talk to again? Because if you're unkind to a person, they're not going to let you back in their office. Like, they don't have to do that. So if you're meeting with somebody, I would just, like, my tactic is just really providing them the information and just continuing to do that, continuing to educate with them. Maybe trying to figure out what things are of interest to them. So, we've done a good job, for example, on clean energy issues of getting certain Republicans interested because of the economic development that happens in their district, or on public health issues. So, if there's somebody who disagrees with you, that's why you do research about a lawmaker. What are things that they've done in the past? Even connections that you might have in common. Like, did you go to the same high school as this particular lawmaker? Can you figure out those connections so you can connect and just, try to lay that groundwork? Because, there are lawmakers that never agree with me on anything. That, there's a lawmaker that's one of the most conservative in the General Assembly, but he's an organic beef farmer that cares very deeply about soil conservation. And so when I have soil conservation stuff, he's somebody I can go talk to. So just keeping that door open, I think, is important. But you might decide as a constituent, like, this is not, maybe your lawmaker's toxic and you don't want them in your life, and that can be okay. But just making sure that they get educational information, I think, and keeping that door open, I think, is really valuable. So however we can do that. And I got more information on, like, there's new lawmakers I don't know, but, like, I unfortunately know a lot of them. But some of them are great. Some of the lawmakers are the greatest people I've ever met in my life, and it's fantastic. So Dominic asked a question: how does lobbying work for parts of state government? Like, if we want to have DNR update its invasive species list, is that something representatives have control over? So when if you're getting paid to do something, if you are asking for a rule change, for example, that's where you might have to register as a lobbyist if you're spending more than $500 of your time on that, if you're getting paid. But if you're just a volunteer, you can reach out and do advocacy with different groups. It is sometimes odd with advocating with agencies, because they're not necessarily going to, like, listen to a bunch of constituents, and, like, they may, like, get really angry if they have 500 emails in their inbox from constituents all over the state, even if you're wanting them to do something. So advocacy sometimes needs to be a little more careful. If I am going to do, like, grassroots advocacy, I often will, like, call that person and just be like, hey, where would you want emails to be sent so that it's not clogging up your inbox and stopping you from getting other work done. But the invasive species list, so I'm not as up to date as I should be, but there's an exotic weed list that can be updated and is updated by statute. I have done a bill to update the exotic weeds list before. I'm not remembering what it is with. I know there's an invasive species list, and I'm trying to think whether it's done by rule. But if you have something specific that you want to work on, I'm gonna put my email in the chat here, and actually Elliot and Ariel could too. You should definitely feel free to reach out and see how we can help if there's this particular invasive species that you want added, and I can help you with whether it's a rule or a statute. And because like the Endangered Species Protection Boards does endangered and threatened species. I don't think they do invasives though. I'd have to take a quick look at the statutes to answer that question, but I have worked on the Exotic Weeds Act before, adding several new species to the Exotic Weeds Act. And also I have worked to remove milkweed. Used to be on the noxious weed list, particularly once at the state, and then it was also on a bunch of city council ones, and it's now prohibited from being listed as a noxious weed. Yeah, David, will you put your email in there too? Thank you. All right, well, just know we are here as a resource. This is confusing. Hopefully this like sorted things out a little more for everybody and gave you some hot tips on how to do this. We'll continue to do things like this in the future. But we are happy to take any questions at any time on this. We're kind of nerds about it. At least I'm a nerd. Elliot or David and Ariel are pretty cool. So thank you. And thanks everybody for joining. All right. I'm gonna stop recording.